Welcome to the First Time Homebuyer Workshop with Julie Marion, and today we're speaking about a land use concept called a variance. Today we're exploring the exceptions to the zoning rules of law, most of the time titled variances within the zoning code. The reason why these exceptions to the rule exist is the mere fact that zoning codes are dynamic and they can be amended to solve local problems that creep up as society, as we discussed in the last content piece, changes. And let's face it, not everyone writes the same sentence the same. People retire, cities are sued, and courts and judges make decisions that require zoning law or the zoning code modifications to be cleared up because it can be unclear. So for all these reasons, a broad category of variance is incorporated into the zoning codes at a broad level. Of course, you want to be able to do what you want on your property. So let's discuss what a variance is and is not. A variance is a process that is delineated within the local zoning code that allows property owners under certain conditions to vary from the existing code because the land cannot meet the development regulations of the zone. What you have to do is find the zone that has been applied to your property and then read the development regulations. And then, depending upon how old or how it is organized and where to look, it can be quite confusing. Now, a variance is varying from the code, as I just said, hence variance, and it applies to the built structures on the land, anything over 36 inches in height. Now, why 36? Because that is the height that triggers the building permit. But no too, if you have a deck or something like that, it might be lower in height. So you still need to check with planning and zoning and the building department. Variances do not apply to use. That is a whole different category. Use applies to what people or animals are doing on the land. For example, a residential use, or maybe somebody has a home-based business that is a use. You can't touch the use. The government officials that are interpreting the envelope where you can build the structures and the decks and the patios, fences, etc., they will take your lot, apply all of the development regulations to the land, and if there are multiple regulations that address the same thing, the most restrictive code section will apply. And then you will end up with an area whereby you can erect things on the lot. Say you want to put up a storage shed or a gazebo or a hot tub. So you will have this developable area in addition to your house. And if the regulations do not allow you to do what you want, then most likely you can apply for a variance. Now, in some jurisdictions, the process is a public hearing and you have to follow all of the procedures just as it's written in the code. And in other areas, sometimes there's administrative processes. When you enter into this type of situation, you and the local government will base it on something called findings. And there may be one or more findings that needs to be made in order for the variance to be granted. You will need to work with the staff and make sure you can meet the findings. Otherwise, most likely, the variance will be denied and it will just cost a lot of money. When I was a planning director, the jurisdiction where I worked routinely approved variances. However, I remember this one case. This lady came in and she wanted to build a Kiva fireplace right on her property line. And I looked at the land and there was really no restrictions impacting her lot. Meaning, for example, she wasn't in a flood zone, nor did she live on a hillside, as an example. She really just wanted to do it because she wanted it. So I presented the project with a recommendation of denial to the approving board. Now, I must mention this board was a political board, and sure enough, she got her approval. The board said they would let her do it, but she needs to build the structure immediately. So just because the staff, or if it doesn't look like it will be approved, sometimes it can be. As a planner, I was really annoyed, but I had to respect the approving body's decision. By the way, she was in the office the next day pulling her building permit. Now be aware, some towns, cities, counties may call the variance process something slightly different because we have in the United States what my former boss called designer zoning, meaning that every town thinks their area is unique and special. So local officials rename terms for their area. However, in truth, it's all the same procedure because this is land use law. If you want to add a use that is not permitted in the zoning classification that applies to a house that you're thinking of buying, then you might want to look under a category that talks about uses. In certain situations, and most of the time, part of that code is discussed as conditional uses or special permits. If you read those sections and do not see the use you want to have on your land in that area, well, there is a process for that too. Usually it's a determination by a zoning administrator, planning director, or sometimes an attorney for the jurisdictions where they will have to render a certain use similar to another type of use. And then two, other types of uses, if allowed in a zone, are allowed via conditional or a special use permit. Those could then require a zoning code amendment as well. Do you need to know this when buying a house? The resounding answer is yes. And when looking at a house, talking about what you might want to do in the future will be very, very helpful. But of course, things change too, and you might not know, or you might change your mind. And that's okay, first-time home buyer. In the First Time Homebuyer Workshop, we do cover a zoning analysis, so if you join us there, you'll be able to walk through your applicable zoning code, and I am a strong advocate. You need to know your way around a zoning code. As recently as November 2023, Homebuyer Remorse, emphasis on home buyer, which could be a first time, a second time, an investor, a vacation house buyer, any type of home buyer, was 92% remorse. And I believe it's things like this where the industry professionals are not alerting you to this type of information. There's a whole lot more to know than knowing what the bank approved you for. And in my mind, something's wrong with the system that's set up in this country, but it's too big and too complex to rearrange. So the easiest thing is for you to become empowered and savvy. There you have it. That's this 15 minutes of home buying knowledge, just another acorn to put in your home buying jar. Join us for the next content piece. And in the meantime, check out Homebuying Chaos Unwrapped, located at the First Time Homebuyer Workshop. See you soon.